When you look at stubborn visceral fat, the kind that hides deep around your organs and quietly drives inflammation, metabolic slowdown, and chronic fatigue, you realize it doesn't respond to random shortcuts or wishful thinking. It responds to clarity, consistency, and a strategy rooted in how your body actually works. Visceral fat is not just about calories. It's about hormonal signals, insulin responses, and the daily habits that either switch your body into fat storing mode or finally unlock fat burning mode from the inside out. People often believe they need extreme diets or punishing workouts, but the truth is far simpler. Your body is constantly sending signals, and when you align your routine with those signals, fat loss begins to happen in a predictable, almost effortless rhythm. The steps you're about to hear are built on the principles of restoring metabolic flexibility, lowering insulin levels naturally, and giving your system the opportunity to tap into its stored energy reserves, especially the fat hidden around your midsection. Once you understand the triggers, once you recognize the importance of timing, nourishment, and recovery, you'll see that burning visceral fat isn't about doing more. It's about doing the right things at the right time with deliberate intention. Every small shift you make begins to change your internal environment, helping your body move away from fat storage and toward fat utilization. And that shift becomes a foundation for long-term metabolic health. When we talk about burning visceral fat, the first truth you must understand is that this type of fat responds primarily to hormonal signals, especially insulin, and not simply to the number of calories you consume. Visceral fat sits deep in the abdominal cavity, surrounding organs like the liver, pancreas, and intestines. And because of its position and function, it behaves differently from the softer subcutaneous fat near the skin. Visceral fat is metabolically active, meaning it constantly interacts with hormonal and inflammatory pathways. And insulin is a hormone that most strongly dictates whether your body is in a state of storing energy or releasing it. When insulin levels are high, your body locks fat inside cells and refuses to use it. When insulin levels drop consistently, the gates open, allowing your body to finally tap into stored visceral fat for energy. This is why people who follow traditional calorie-cutting approaches often feel frustrated. They eat less, but still don't lose the dangerous fat around their midsection. Because the issue isn't the quantity of food alone, but the hormonal environment their eating habits create. Insulin rises in response to food intake, especially carbohydrates and sugars, but also from frequent eating, snacking, high stress, inadequate sleep, and inflammatory foods that disrupt metabolic balance. Lowering insulin isn't about extreme restriction, but about creating longer periods where insulin has a chance to fall, allowing your body to switch from fat-storing mode to fat-burning mode in a natural rhythm aligned with human biology. Think of your body like a hybrid car that can switch between external fuel and internal reserves. As long as insulin is elevated, you stay locked into external fuel and never access the internal tank where visceral fat is stored. People often underestimate how easy it is for insulin to stay elevated all day without them realizing it. Breakfast in the morning, a snack a couple of hours later, lunch, an afternoon snack, dinner, late night nibbling, plus sugary drinks or processed foods sprinkled throughout the day keep insulin from ever dropping to a level where fat burning can occur. This means even if total calories are lower, the hormonal signal is constantly telling your body to hold on to visceral fat. The key is to create periods of low insulin through intentional meal timing, balanced nutrition, and stress reduction. When insulin levels drop, fat cells begin releasing stored fatty acids into the bloodstream, allowing them to be burned for energy. This process isn't forced. It's the body's natural default state when there is no incoming food to metabolize. That's why short fasting windows, extended breaks between meals, and avoiding unnecessary snacking have such a powerful effect on visceral fat. They allow insulin to settle gradually, giving your system permission to use the stored fat that's been trapped for years. When this process begins, people often feel a surprising increase in mental clarity and stable energy because the body finally gains access to a consistent internal fuel source rather than relying on constant external feeding. Lowering insulin also means being mindful of the types of foods you choose. Whole foods, especially those high in fiber, protein, and healthy fats, lead to a slower and more controlled release of glucose, resulting in a gentler insulin response. Processed carbs, sugar, refined grains, and foods cooked in cheap seed oils cause rapid spikes that make fat burning nearly impossible. When you choose foods that keep insulin stable, you reduce the hormonal pressure to store fat, and instead allow your body to shift toward using fat as fuel. This is why people often find that once they reduce these trigger foods, cravings decrease dramatically. Those cravings weren't a lack of willpower. They were hormonal swings created by unstable insulin and blood sugar levels. As balance is restored, appetite calms, metabolism becomes more predictable, and visceral fat becomes more accessible. Another important factor in lowering insulin is managing stress, because cortisol, the stress hormone, can trigger insulin elevation even without food. Chronic stress tells your body to prepare for danger, encouraging fat storage, particularly visceral fat, because your body assumes it needs easy access to emergency energy. When you incorporate simple stress-reducing practices like deep breathing, walking, sunlight exposure, or mindfulness, insulin responds by settling into a healthier rhythm. Sleep plays a similar role. Poor sleep increases insulin resistance and elevates hunger hormones, making it much harder to burn visceral fat. Prioritizing quality sleep becomes not just a lifestyle choice, but a metabolic strategy that directly influences insulin and fat-burning pathways. When insulin levels drop consistently, your body begins operating in a more metabolically flexible state, where it can transition between fuel sources efficiently. This is a state where visceral fat finally begins to shrink, not in sudden dramatic bursts, but in a steady, reliable way that reflects true internal healing rather than temporary dieting efforts. You begin to feel lighter internally. Digestion improves, inflammation decreases, and your body finally works with you instead of fighting against you. This is a foundation of real visceral fat loss driven by hormonal alignment rather than extreme deprivation or unsustainable routine, as meal timing can be more powerful than meal size because the body doesn't simply respond to what you eat. It responds to when you eat, how frequently you eat, and the rhythm in which your meals fall throughout the day. Most people focus only on reducing portions or counting calories, but they overlook the biological reality that constant eating keeps the body trapped in a fed state where insulin remains elevated and fat burning becomes nearly impossible. When your meals are spaced too closely together, even if those meals are small, your metabolic system never gets the downtime it needs to shift into fat-burning mode. This is because every eating event, no matter how clean or low-calorie, triggers an insulin response. And as long as insulin is present in the bloodstream, the body continues prioritizing incoming food rather than tapping into the deep stores of visceral fat. Understanding this dynamic is essential because it reveals that the frequency of eating may matter even more than the quantity. Many people unknowingly sabotage their fat-burning potential by grazing throughout the day, reaching for snacks out of habit, boredom, or emotional triggers, and drinking beverages that elevate insulin without offering any nutritional value. Breaking this cycle requires reframing meals not just as fuel, but as strategic metabolic events that work with your biochemistry instead of against it. When you begin aligning your meal timing with the body's natural rhythms, something powerful happens. Your insulin levels stabilize, your hunger hormones become more predictable, and the window during which your body can burn stored fat expands. This is why approaches like time-restricted eating, eating earlier in the day, or spacing meals at least 4 to 5 hours apart allow for better metabolic flexibility. It's not about starving yourself. It's about giving your body breathing room between meals so it can finish processing nutrients, clear glucose efficiently, and finally access stored fat. Most people have never actually experienced their body running on stored energy because they've been conditioned to believe that you must eat constantly to maintain energy. But once you experience the steady, stable energy that comes from relying on internal stores, you begin to understand that constant eating was actually draining you rather than sustaining you. You start recognizing that the midday crash, constant cravings, and sluggishness weren't signs you needed more food. They were signs your insulin never had a chance to fall. Meal timing also influences circadian biology, which affect how effectively your body uses or stores energy. The human metabolism is naturally more insulin sensitive earlier in the day, meaning the same meal eaten in the morning will produce a smoother glucose response compared to eating it late at night. Late night meals, even if small, can produce exaggerated insulin spikes because the body is preparing for rest, not digestion. This leads to more fat storage, more inflammation, and a disrupted hormonal rhythm that carries into the next day. When you shift your meals earlier or compress your eating window, you harness your body's natural ability to process food efficiently. Over time, your appetite adjusts, your cravings soften, and your energy levels become smoother because you're no longer fighting against your internal clock. Spacing meals and reducing eating frequency also teaches your body to regulate hunger more naturally. Most people think hunger is a constant biological signal, but in reality, hunger follows patterns. Patterns shaped by habit as much as physiology. When you eat every 2 hours, your body becomes conditioned to expect food every 2 hours, whether it needs it or not. When you begin stretching the time between meals, hunger starts becoming more stable and less urgent. You realize that many cravings were actually dopamine-driven desires rather than true physiological hunger. With time, the body begins producing steady, predictable hunger waves that align with actual energy needs rather than emotional or habitual cues. This newfound balance gives you more control over your eating patterns without forcing willpower or restriction. Another crucial part of meal timing is understanding that metabolic processes require time to complete. After each meal, your body goes through a sequence of actions: digesting food, absorbing nutrients, using glucose, storing excess energy, and managing insulin. When the next meal arrives too soon, this cycle never completes, leaving you in a constant state of nutrient processing. This continual fed state increases the likelihood of insulin resistance, where cells become less responsive to insulin, causing the body to release even more insulin to compensate. This becomes one of the strongest drivers of visceral fat accumulation. By creating longer gaps between meals, you give your body the chance to lower insulin naturally, improve insulin sensitivity, and re-enter a state where fat burning becomes accessible. Over time, you begin feeling a sense of internal harmony, as though the body is operating with more coherence and less strain, because you've stopped bombarding it with constant metabolic demands. Meal timing is not about eating less. It's about eating smarter, eating with purpose, and creating an internal environment that favors fat burning rather than fat storage. When you master this principle, you unlock one of the most potent and sustainable tools for reducing visceral fat and supporting long-term metabolic health. Processed carbs trigger fat storage hormones faster than most people realize because they break down into glucose at a rate the body isn't naturally designed to handle, especially when consumed frequently or in large amounts. When you eat foods like white bread, pastries, sugary snacks, sweetened beverages, or refined grains, they quickly surge through the digestive system and flood the bloodstream with glucose. The body must respond urgently to this spike to prevent dangerous elevations in blood sugar, and it does so by releasing a large amount of insulin. Insulin acts like a gatekeeper, moving glucose out of the bloodstream and pushing it into cells for use or storage. But when the glucose load is too high or too frequent, the body stores the excess as fat, and visceral fat becomes one of the primary storage sites. Over time, this repeated cycle trains the body to remain in fat storage mode because insulin rarely gets the break it needs to fall back to a baseline level. This is why people can feel like they're doing everything right, but still gain weight around their midsection. It's not simply the calories from these foods, but the hormonal chaos they create that leads to stubborn fat accumulation. When processed carbs enter the bloodstream too quickly, they cause not just a single insulin spike, but a roller coaster of hormonal responses. After insulin surges and pushes glucose out of the blood, levels drop sharply, which can leave you feeling tired, hungry, and craving more carbohydrates. This is the blood sugar crash that so many people experience without realizing its origin. You feel the sudden dip in energy. You reach for another snack, and the cycle repeats. Each time insulin rises again, preventing fat from being burned and encouraging more fat to be stored. These rapid fluctuations disrupt the body's metabolic stability, making it much harder for hormones like ghrelin and leptin, which regulate hunger and fullness, to function properly. Over time, you may feel hungry even when your body has plenty of stored energy, because the hormonal signals are being overridden by the constant glucose swings triggered by processed carbs. This is why cravings for sugary or starchy foods feel so powerful. They are not simply about taste, but about the body desperately trying to correct hormonal imbalances that were created by the previous spike. The impact of processed carbs goes beyond hunger and insulin. These foods also cause inflammation within the body, which further contributes to visceral fat accumulation. Visceral fat itself is metabolically active and releases inflammatory molecules, creating a cycle where inflammation leads to more fat storage, and more fat storage leads to even greater inflammation. Processed foods, especially those made with refined grains and industrial seed oils, fuel this inflammatory process by disrupting normal metabolic pathways and creating oxidative stress. Over time, these disruptions weaken insulin sensitivity, meaning the body must release even more insulin to handle the same amount of glucose. When insulin sensitivity declines, fat burning slows dramatically and fat storage speeds up. This is why people often feel stuck, even when they are eating less food overall. The issue is not just quantity, but the quality and type of carbohydrates they are consuming. Processed carbs also override the natural reward system in the brain, making them incredibly easy to overeat. These foods are engineered to be hyperpalatable, meaning they stimulate dopamine in a way that whole unprocessed foods do not. The more often you stimulate this reward pathway, the more your brain begins to associate stress relief, comfort, or quick energy with refined carbohydrates. This makes it difficult to break the cycle, even when you consciously want to make better choices. Overeating becomes less about hunger and more about chasing the temporary dopamine boost that processed carbs provide. This is why many people find themselves reaching for snacks mindlessly or craving sweets after meals. The brain has been conditioned to expect the rapid reward that these foods deliver. When you begin reducing processed carbs and replacing them with whole fiber-rich foods, the body's hormonal environment starts to shift almost immediately. Whole foods digest more slowly, causing a gradual release of glucose that the body can manage without excessive insulin production. Blood sugar becomes more stable, energy levels even out, and cravings begin to diminish because the hormonal roller coaster finally calms down. Fiber also plays a major role by slowing digestion, feeding healthy gut bacteria, and improving insulin sensitivity. Protein and healthy fats help stabilize meals further, preventing rapid spikes, and keeping hunger control for longer periods. As insulin levels become more balanced, the body regains the ability to access stored fat for energy, especially visceral fat that had been locked away for years due to chronic hormonal overstimulation. Over time, this shift away from processed carbs allows the metabolism to heal, inflammation to decrease, and fat-burning pathways to reactivate in a steady, reliable way that supports long-term health and sustainable weight loss. Short fasting windows help unlock deep fat reserves because they give your body the uninterrupted time it needs to switch from burning incoming food to burning stored energy. Something that rarely happens in a lifestyle filled with constant snacking, late-night eating, and meals spaced too close together. When you stop eating for several hours, insulin levels begin to fall. And this is the key that opens the door to fat burning. As long as insulin is circulating at elevated levels, your body will hold tightly to its fat stores, especially visceral fat around the organs, because insulin's primary job is to promote energy storage. But when you create a fasting window, even a modest one such as 12 to 16 hours, insulin gradually declines, signaling the body to shift into a different metabolic state, where it begins mobilizing stored fat for fuel. This process doesn't happen instantly. It takes time for insulin to drop sufficiently, which is why fasting windows become so effective. They give your metabolism the break it needs to transition away from constant digestion and toward using the energy reserves that have been building up for years. During a fasting window, your body begins tapping into glycogen stores first, which are the carbohydrate reserves in your liver. Once these begin to deplete, the body naturally moves toward burning fat, including the stubborn visceral fat that contributes to inflammation and metabolic disease. This transition is not extreme or harsh. It is simply the design of human biology. Our ancestors routinely experienced a period without food, so the body evolved to store energy efficiently and then release it when meals were not available. But today's environment with abundant food available around the clock keeps the body perpetually stuck in storage mode. A short fasting window restores its natural ebb and flow, allowing fat-burning hormones like glucagon, growth hormone, and adrenaline to rise and balance as insulin continues to decline. These hormonal shifts create the ideal internal environment for unlocking deep fat reserves and using them for energy, which is why so many people feel lighter, clearer, and more energized when they begin incorporating fasting windows into their routine. What makes short fasting windows so powerful is that they are sustainable and manageable for almost anyone because they do not require complicated meal plans or extreme calorie restriction. Instead of focusing on what to eat, you focus on when to eat, creating a structure that simplifies your day and stabilizes your metabolism. For many people, simply delaying breakfast, avoiding late-night eating, or shifting meals into a compressed window can create profound metabolic changes. As the body becomes more comfortable with these windows, insulin sensitivity improves, meaning the body becomes more efficient at handling glucose when you do eat. This reduces the likelihood of sharp blood sugar spikes, excessive insulin release, and fat storage. Over time, these improvements compound, leading to gradual and consistent reductions in visceral fat, improved digestion, reduced bloating, and better hormonal balance. Fasting windows also help recalibrate hunger signals, something that gets disrupted when the body is constantly fed. Many people believe they're hungry when they're actually experiencing emotional triggers, habitual cues, or dips in blood sugar caused by earlier insulin spikes. When you introduce fasting windows, you allow hunger hormones like ghrelin and leptin to reestablish a more natural rhythm. Instead of feeling hungry every couple of hours, hunger begins arriving in predictable waves that align with the body's genuine need for fuel. This newfound clarity around hunger reduces cravings, especially for sugary or processed foods, because your hormonal environment becomes far more stable. With fewer insulin spikes throughout the day, the body stops demanding quick bursts of energy and instead becomes comfortable relying on stored fat, leading to a steady state of energy that feels grounded and consistent. As your body adapts to fasting windows, another significant shift occurs. Inflammation decreases. Visceral fat produces inflammatory molecules that disrupt metabolism and create a cycle of insulin resistance and further fat storage. When you burn visceral fat during a fasting window, you interrupt the cycle, allowing inflammation to subside. Lower inflammation improves everything from joint comfort to mental clarity to the efficiency of metabolic processes, reinforcing your ability to burn fat more effectively. Many people also notice improved digestive health during fasting windows because the gut receives time to rest and repair. Constant eating forces the digestive system to work nonstop, leading to bloating, indigestion, and fatigue. When you introduce a fasting window, the digestive tract experiences a period of calm, allowing it to function more efficiently when you resume eating. Short fasting windows also encourage autophagy, the body's natural process of cleaning up damaged cells and recycling cellular waste. This internal cleanup not only supports overall health, but also improves the body's ability to function efficiently at the metabolic level. When cells operate more efficiently, insulin sensitivity improves, inflammation decreases, and fat-burning pathways become more active. This internal renewal is one of the hidden advantages of fasting windows, contributing to both immediate and long-term improvements in health and energy. Over weeks and months, these shifts create a cumulative effect where the body becomes increasingly adept at switching between fuel sources, releasing stored fat, and maintaining metabolic balance without constant effort or extreme dieting. Incorporating short fasting windows ultimately shifts the foundation of your lifestyle from one that encourages storage to one that supports steady, sustainable fat burning. This approach requires no deprivation, no elaborate rules, and no complicated calculations. It simply respects the body's natural rhythms and gives it the time it needs to function optimally, unlocking deep fat reserves through hormonal balance, improved metabolic flexibility, and a renewed sense of internal equilibrium. Quality sleep directly influences hunger and fat-burning signals because sleep is one of the most powerful biological regulators of metabolism, hormones, appetite, and energy balance. When you consistently get deep restorative sleep, your body shifts into a state where it can manage glucose efficiently, release balanced levels of hunger hormones, and maintain the hormonal rhythm that supports burning visceral fat. But when sleep is cut short, fragmented, or pushed too late into the night, the opposite happens. The body becomes stressed, insulin resistance increases, cravings intensify, and fat storage, especially visceral fat, begins to accelerate. Most people underestimate how profoundly sleep impacts fat loss, imagining that it's simply a matter of eating less or exercising more. But sleep acts as a foundation upon which all other fat-burning strategies rest. Without quality sleep, even perfect nutrition and disciplined routine struggle to produce meaningful results because the biological environment needed to burn fat never fully engages. During deep sleep, the body calibrates essential systems. It regulates cortisol, stabilizes insulin, repairs tissues, balances neurotransmitters, and resets the brain's appetite control network. When this nightly reset is disrupted, the metabolic machinery begins each day already tilted in the wrong direction. One of the clearest ways sleep affects visceral fat is through its impact on insulin sensitivity. Poor sleep makes the body less responsive to insulin, meaning glucose stays in the bloodstream longer, triggering higher insulin release to compensate. This excess insulin pushes the body into storage mode, preventing fat burning and encouraging visceral fat accumulation. Even a single night of inadequate sleep can reduce insulin sensitivity by up to 20 to 30%, making the body behave as if it is pre-diabetic the next day. Over time, this pattern becomes chronic, keeping insulin elevated and locking fat inside cells. This explains why people who sleep poorly often struggle with midsection weight gain despite eating normally or maintaining their exercise routine. The body is simply not responding to food the way it should because the hormonal environment has been disrupted by inadequate sleep. Sleep also has a powerful effect on appetite regulation. The hormones ghrelin and leptin work together to control hunger and fullness, but they depend heavily on sleep for proper balance. Ghrelin stimulates appetite, while leptin signals satiety. When you lack sleep, ghrelin levels rise, making you feel hungrier, while leptin levels fall, making it harder to feel satisfied after eating. This double effect leads to cravings, overeating, and a persistent feeling of needing more food. What many people interpret as weak willpower is often just hormonal imbalance caused by insufficient sleep. These cravings tend to focus specifically on high-calorie, high-carb foods because the body is looking for quick energy to compensate for fatigue caused by sleep deprivation. Over time, consistently elevated hunger signals and reduced satiety create a pattern of overeating that naturally leads to fat storage, particularly in the abdominal region, where stress-related fat tends to accumulate. Sleep also modulates cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. When sleep is poor, cortisol rises, which not only increases stress, but also promotes the storage of visceral fat. Cortisol makes the body more efficient at depositing fat around the organs because visceral fat is metabolically active and releases energy quickly during times of perceived threat. Chronic elevation of cortisol signals the body to hold on to this type of fat as a protective mechanism. This means a person can eat clean, avoid sugar, and even exercise regularly yet still struggle to burn visceral fat if cortisol remains high due to lack of sleep. Balanced sleep lowers cortisol naturally, reducing internal stress, and allowing the body to release stored fat instead of clinging to it. During quality sleep, the body also produces growth hormone, which plays a critical role in repairing tissues, maintaining lean muscle, and supporting fat metabolism. Growth hormone is released in the deepest stages of sleep, helping the body shift toward fat burning and muscle preservation. When sleep is disrupted or shortened, growth hormone release is reduced, making it harder to maintain muscle mass and burn fat efficiently because muscle tissue is metabolically active and burns calories even at rest. Losing muscle due to poor sleep slows metabolism further. This creates a cycle in which poor sleep leads to less muscle, which leads to slower metabolism, which leads to more fat accumulation around the midsection. Another often overlooked impact of sleep on visceral fat is the effect on decision-making and impulse control. Sleep deprivation impairs the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for discipline, planning, and self-control. At the same time, it increases activity in the brain's reward centers, making unhealthy foods more appealing and harder to resist. This isn't simply psychological, it's biochemical. When the brain is tired, it seeks comfort and quick dopamine hits. And processed foods provide exactly that. Over time, consistently making choices out of fatigue rather than clarity leads to habits that worsen metabolic health. Quality sleep strengthens circadian rhythms, the internal clock that governs metabolism, digestion, hormone release, and energy usage. When circadian rhythms are aligned, the body becomes more efficient at burning fat during the day and repairing itself at night. But late-night eating, exposure to bright screens, irregular sleep schedules, and poor sleep hygiene disrupt this internal clock, causing metabolism to operate out of sync. This misalignment makes the body more likely to store fat rather than burn it because the natural rhythm of hormonal release has been disturbed. Prioritizing sleep becomes a metabolic strategy because it allows all fat-burning mechanisms to work in harmony. When you sleep deeply and consistently, insulin sensitivity improves, cortisol stabilizes, hunger hormones balance, cravings diminish, and the body begins to release rather than store visceral fat. Over time, quality sleep transforms the internal environment, shifting it from survival mode toward a state where fat burning becomes a natural and sustainable process driven by hormonal balance, circadian stability, and optimal metabolic function. Chronic stress keeps your body in fat preservation mode because stress signals activate survival pathways that instruct the body to store energy rather than burn it, especially around the abdominal organs where visceral fat accumulates most rapidly. When the mind perceives stress, whether physical, emotional, or environmental, the body releases cortisol, a hormone designed to help you cope with danger. In short bursts, cortisol is useful and even necessary. But when stress becomes chronic, cortisol remains elevated far longer than the body is designed to tolerate. This constant elevation sends a powerful message to metabolism: conserve energy, increase fat storage, and prepare for perceived threats. Visceral fat is particularly responsive to cortisol because it contains more cortisol receptors than other types of fat, which means it grows faster under stress. This is why people under chronic pressure often notice their waistline expanding even if their eating habits haven't changed drastically. The body isn't malfunctioning. It's prioritizing survival by storing energy where it can be accessed quickly in an emergency. When cortisol stays elevated throughout the day, it disrupts almost every hormonal system responsible for maintaining a healthy metabolism. One of the first areas affected is insulin sensitivity. High cortisol levels make cells less responsive to insulin, forcing the pancreas to release more of it to keep blood sugar stable. Elevated insulin combined with elevated cortisol creates the perfect storm for fat storage, locking stored fat inside cells while pushing any excess glucose into new fat deposits. This hormonal combination is one of the primary reasons chronic stress leads to stubborn visceral fat. Even if you are eating nourishing foods, if cortisol remains high, the body is less capable of using that energy efficiently. Instead, it interprets your internal state as one in which resources must be conserved. Over time, this state of hormonal imbalance leads to increased cravings for sugary or high-carbohydrate foods because the body is searching for quick energy to fuel a stress response that never ends. This creates a loop of stress eating, insulin spikes, and additional fat storage that becomes increasingly difficult to break without addressing the root cause. Chronic stress also interferes with the hunger regulation system, specifically hormones like ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin rises under stress, increasing your appetite and triggering emotional or habitual eating patterns. Leptin, which signals fullness, becomes less effective. So even after eating, you may still feel unsatisfied or continue craving more food. This imbalance leads to overeating, especially in the form of comfort foods that provide immediate but short-lived relief. Many people blame themselves for lack of willpower during stressful periods, but in reality, their biology is being hijacked by hormonal signals designed to cope with survival threats. When these signals are activated long-term, they disrupt the body's ability to regulate energy intake and use, making weight gain almost inevitable unless the stress response is addressed. Another way chronic stress promotes fat preservation is through its impact on sleep. Stress makes it harder to fall asleep, stay asleep, and reach deep restorative sleep stages. Poor sleep then raises cortisol even further, creating a cycle where stress leads to poor sleep, and poor sleep amplifies stress. This cycle undermines metabolic health on multiple levels. Without quality sleep, insulin sensitivity declines, cravings increase, growth hormone release diminishes, and the body shifts further into fat storage mode. Over time, this begins to feel like a metabolic trap, where no matter how disciplined you are with food, your body continues holding on to visceral fat because its internal signals are misaligned. This is why addressing stress becomes just as critical as choosing the right foods or adopting proper meal timing. Stress influences breathing patterns as well. Under chronic tension, many people adopt shallow, rapid breathing without realizing it, which keeps the nervous system in a constant state of alertness. This type of breathing reinforces the stress response, increases cortisol, and further restricts the body's ability to shift into parasympathetic mode, the state where digestion, healing, and fat burning occur. When the nervous system is stuck in a fight or flight state, the body prioritizes immediate survival over long-term metabolic stability. Digestion slows, nutrient absorption declines, and the body becomes less efficient at handling glucose, all of which contribute to weight gain around the midsection. Even daily habits influenced by stress, such as skipping meals, overeating, emotional snacking, relying on caffeine, or staying sedentary, reinforce the cycle of fat preservation. When the mind is overwhelmed, it's easy to slip into patterns that elevate insulin, spike blood sugar, or disrupt circadian rhythm, each of which signals the body to continue storing fat rather than burning it. Chronic stress also reduces motivation to exercise or move. And even when exercise does occur, excessive stress can blunt the fat-burning effects by keeping cortisol elevated long after the workout is over. This is why some people exercise intensely yet struggle to lose visceral fat. Their internal stress load is too high for their body to shift into fat release mode. Addressing chronic stress becomes a metabolic priority because once cortisol begins to normalize, the body's natural fat-burning mechanisms activate far more efficiently. Hunger hormones stabilize, insulin sensitivity improves, cravings reduce, sleep deepens, and the body transitions out of survival mode into a state where visceral fat can finally be released. Even simple practices like slow breathing, consistent routines, sunlight exposure, short walks, or mindful pauses throughout the day can signal safety to the nervous system, lowering cortisol gradually. As these signals accumulate, the body begins shifting away from fat preservation and toward fat mobilization, responding more effectively to every other health habit you implement, and creating an internal environment that allows visceral fat loss to occur naturally and consistently. When you begin to understand how deeply stress influences visceral fat, everything about your health journey starts to look different. So many people focus narrowly on calories, workouts, or what they're eating, but they overlook one of the most powerful metabolic disruptors, chronic stress. When stress becomes a daily companion, your hormonal environment shifts and your body responds as if it must store energy for survival. This is where cortisol steps in. Cortisol isn't the enemy. It's a hormone meant to protect you in short bursts, but when it stays elevated for long periods, it drives your body to accumulate fat centrally right around your organs because this is the most accessible place for emergency fuel. Understanding this mechanism brings clarity to why someone can diet perfectly and still struggle with stubborn belly fat. It's not a flaw in their effort. It's a physiological response to an overwhelmed system. The problem is that modern stress doesn't look like running from danger. It looks like constant notifications, financial pressure, family responsibilities, long hours, and unresolved emotions that simmer under the surface. Unlike physical threats that come and go, these mental and emotional triggers don't switch off, meaning cortisol never gets a chance to reset. Your body keeps interpreting this as a reason to increase energy storage. You might even notice that when you're stressed, craving for sugary or salty comfort food spike. That's not a lack of willpower. It's your biology trying to create quick access energy as a buffer for the stress it perceives. This is why people often regain weight despite dieting. They're trying to solve a stress-driven problem with a food-only strategy. Reducing stress doesn't mean escaping responsibilities. It means learning how to train your nervous system to return to calm more quickly and more consistently. Even small moments of regulation can shift your hormonal landscape and tell your body that it no longer needs to store protective fat. Deep breathing, for example, might seem too simple to matter, but it activates the parasympathetic nervous system, lowering cortisol and creating a ripple effect through your entire metabolism. When you take slow breaths, you signal safety to your brain. Safety lowers stress hormones. Lower stress hormones reduce fat storage signals. This chain reaction is powerful, especially when practiced daily. Movement also plays a role in managing stress-related visceral fat. Not intense workouts that spike cortisol further, but gentle intention-based movement like walking, mobility routines, stretching, or light strength work. These forms of movement help metabolize stress hormones and reduce inflammation without overwhelming the nervous system. Many people think they need to push harder when their weight stalls, But sometimes the body needs less intensity and more recovery to rebalance hormones. Even a 10-minute walk after meals can shift your body chemistry, lower blood glucose, and ease a physiological load on your system. Consistency in these small shifts matters more than bursts of extreme effort that burn you out. Sleep, too, becomes a critical part of controlling cortisol and reducing visceral fat. When sleep is cut short, your stress levels rise the next day. Your cravings intensify, your decision-making weakens, and your metabolism becomes more conservative. Lack of sleep places your body in a stress state before the day even begins, and the cycle repeats. Prioritizing sleep doesn't require dramatic changes. It can start with reducing bright screens before bed, keeping your room cool, or creating small wind-down rituals that help transition your mind into rest mode. These subtle habits compound over time, and they reshape the hormonal environment that influences fat storage far more powerfully than most people realize. Mental stress isn't the only factor. Emotional stress holds equal influence. Carrying unresolved frustration, grief, or pressure keeps your nervous system on high alert. When the brain detects emotional discomfort, it often triggers the same hormonal cascade as physical danger. Many people eat not because they're hungry, but because food temporarily numbs emotional discomfort. Recognizing this pattern without judgment is the first step toward breaking it. Emotional awareness empowers you to make choices that support your body instead of working against it. Even journaling for 5 minutes can release mental tension and reduce triggers that lead to overeating or hormonal imbalances. Connection and community also play an underestimated role in reducing stress-driven visceral fat. Humans are wired for support. When you share your challenges and victories with others, your brain releases oxytocin, a hormone that counteracts cortisol. Something as simple as laughing with someone or having a genuine conversation can shift your body from a state of stress to a state of safety. This shift directly affects how your metabolism functions. People who feel supported, not necessarily by many, but by even one meaningful connection, often find it easier to maintain healthier habits and break the cycles that drive visceral fat accumulation. When you begin to actively reduce stress in intentional, practical ways, your body responds, your cravings ease, your energy stabilizes, your hormones rebalance, and fat no longer needs to accumulate as a protective mechanism. This is not about eliminating all stress from your life, which is impossible. It's about giving your body enough moments of regulation so it no longer operates in survival mode. These small shifts build a foundation for metabolic stability and open the door for fat loss to happen naturally rather than through constant force and frustration. One of the most overlooked strategies for burning visceral fat quickly is learning how to optimize your meal timing. Because when you shift not just what you eat, but when you eat, your metabolic environment changes in ways that directly target deep abdominal fat. Most people believe fat loss is controlled entirely by eating less. But in reality, your body runs on hormonal rhythms and energy cycles that determine whether you are in a fat-storing state or a fat-burning state. The biggest factor influencing these cycles is insulin, and insulin responds dramatically to the timing of your meals. Every time you eat, insulin rises to process the nutrients in your blood. When insulin stays high throughout the day due to constant eating, your body never gets a chance to access stored fat. This is particularly true with visceral fat, because this type of fat is hormonally sensitive and responds quickly when insulin levels finally begin to drop. When you create intentional gaps between meals instead of grazing all day, your body shifts from sugar burning to fat burning more efficiently. This switch does not happen instantly. It happens after several hours of not eating when insulin finally decreases enough for fat cells to open and release stored energy. People often underestimate how powerful this process is because they are used to thinking about fat loss in terms of calorie math rather than hormonal access. But visceral fat is not removed through force. It is burned when your hormonal conditions allow it. The moment insulin drops, your body begins to unlock fuel from the deepest places it stored it, including the fat around major organs. This is why even modest fasting windows like not snacking between meals or extending the time between dinner and the next day's breakfast can set off a chain reaction that accelerates fat burning without requiring extreme dieting. Meal timing also impacts appetite control in ways most people don't expect. When you constantly spike insulin by eating frequently, your hunger signals become dysregulated. You might feel hungry even when your body has plenty of stored energy simply because your hormones are out of sync. When you space meals out more naturally, those hunger waves settle down. Your cravings drop, your energy stabilizes, and your body stops urging you to eat every few hours. Many people describe this as the first time they feel like their hunger is under control, not because they're restricting themselves, but because their hormones are finally aligned with how the body is designed to function. This shift is one of the key reasons meal timing is so effective for reducing visceral fat. Because when hunger and appetite become more stable, you break the cycle of overeating and constant snacking that keeps insulin elevated all day. Another powerful impact of optimizing meal timing is improving insulin sensitivity. When you give your body periods without food, your cells become more responsive to insulin the next time you eat. This reduces the overall insulin load required to manage a meal, lowering the amount of fat storage signaling. Over time, this creates an environment where the body prefers to burn instead of store. Many people who adopt structured meal timing report improvements in digestion, energy, sleep, and mental clarity, all of which feed into better metabolic function. The body works more efficiently when it isn't burdened with processing food constantly. This efficiency is what allows deeper fat reserves to be accessed more consistently throughout the day. Even small timing shifts can have a significant impact. Delaying breakfast slightly, ending dinner earlier, or eliminating late-night snacking each play a role in giving your body extended periods of lower insulin. Late-night eating is particularly problematic for visceral fat because at night your metabolism slows down and your body becomes more insulin resistant. Eating in that state forces your system into storing mode. By simply finishing your last meal earlier, you create an opportunity for your body to tap into stored fat for longer while you sleep. This is one of the most effortless ways to reduce visceral fat because you are essentially burning fat overnight without any extra effort. People often underestimate how much metabolic repair happens while they sleep, and meal timing plays a major role in whether that repair is focused on healing or storing. One of the most important parts of optimizing meal timing is consistency. You don't need perfection. What matters is establishing a rhythm your body can rely on. When your eating schedule becomes predictable, your hormones synchronize with your lifestyle. Your body begins preparing for digestion at the right times and shifting into fat burning at the right times. This alignment is incredibly powerful because it eliminates the internal chaos that drives cravings and fat storage. You start to feel more balanced, clearer, and more in control of your choices. Many people notice that once their meal timing stabilizes, they naturally gravitate toward healthier eating without forcing it. The reduced hunger and improved energy make better habits feel easier, which reinforces a hormonal environment needed to burn visceral fat consistently. Another insight about meal timing is the importance of eating meals that actually satisfy so you don't feel the need to snack. Protein, fiber, and healthy fats help stabilize blood sugar, whereas highly processed foods cause rapid spikes and crashes that make you hungry again within hours. When your meals keep you satisfied, spacing them out becomes effortless. This creates a metabolic pattern where insulin peaks less frequently and returns to baseline more quickly, giving your body more hours each day in a fat-burning state. The better your meal support satiety, the easier it becomes to maintain a timing strategy that supports visceral fat loss. This isn't about eating less food. It's about eating food that works with your hormones instead of against them. When you learn to use meal timing as a tool rather than relying on constant restriction, you begin to experience fat loss as a natural process rather than a battle. Your body isn't meant to be in feeding mode all day. It's designed to alternate between feeding and fasting, storing and burning, resting and repairing. When you honor this natural rhythm, visceral fat becomes more accessible. Cravings fade, and your metabolic system begins to function the way it was always intended to. Meal timing becomes not just a strategy for fat loss, but a way of restoring balance to your entire body and creating an environment where deep, stubborn fat can finally be released. Reducing snacking prevents constant insulin spikes. Because every time you put food in your mouth, your body responds with a cascade of hormonal signals designed to manage the incoming nutrients. Insulin is the primary hormone, responsible for moving glucose from the blood into cells. and when it is elevated continuously throughout the day, your body remains in a fat storing mode, particularly storing energy in the visceral fat that surrounds your organs. Many people believe that small snacks are harmless or even necessary to maintain energy. But the reality is that frequent eating, even if the food is healthy, keeps insulin from dropping to baseline levels. Without those periods of low insulin, fat cells are effectively locked and the body cannot access stored visceral fat efficiently. This is why people can eat fewer calories overall, yet still struggle with stubborn belly fat. The hormonal environment created by constant eating overrides simple caloric math. Snacking also disrupts the natural rhythm of hunger and satiety hormones. Ghrelin, the hormone that signals hunger, and leptin, the hormone that signals fullness, depend on periods of fasting between meals to function properly. When snacks are introduced too frequently, ghrelin remains elevated, causing persistent feelings of hunger, even if energy needs are met, while leptin's ability to signal satisfaction diminishes. This hormonal imbalance creates a feedback loop where the body continues to crave food, often choosing highly palatable snacks high in sugar or refined carbohydrates. Over time, this pattern reinforces insulin spikes and fat storage, particularly in the visceral region, because the body interprets frequent feeding as a signal that it needs to store energy rather than mobilize it. What feels like a small indulgence each day becomes a chronic barrier to fat loss when viewed through the lens of hormonal dynamics rather than calories alone. Constant snacking also interferes with metabolic flexibility, which is the body's ability to switch efficiently between burning glucose from food and burning stored fat for energy. When insulin is persistently elevated from frequent snacks, the body remains reliant on external fuel sources rather than tapping into stored fat reserves. This lack of flexibility makes energy levels fluctuate, often leading to mid-afternoon crashes, cravings, and overeating. By reducing snacking, you allow your body to complete the digestion and absorption process from prior meals, enabling insulin levels to drop and signaling the system to shift toward fat utilization. This process is particularly important for visceral fat because it is the first fat the body will hold on to during periods of hormonal stress or elevated insulin, making its mobilization dependent on creating extended insulin-free periods throughout the day. Reducing snacking also improves mental clarity and decision-making. When blood sugar remains elevated due to constant food intake, the body experiences fluctuations that can impact mood focus and impulse control. High insulin levels and rapid glucose swings affect neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, making it more difficult to resist unhealthy food choices. By minimizing snacks, you stabilize blood sugar, reduce insulin fluctuations, and support more balanced brain chemistry. This creates a feedback loop where decision-making improves, cravings diminish, and adherence to healthy eating patterns becomes more natural. Many people find that once they stop snacking, they no longer feel the need to constantly monitor or control their behavior. The body's own hormonal regulation begins to guide food intake in a more intuitive and effective way. Another critical aspect of reducing snacking is its impact on inflammation. Frequent eating, especially of processed or high-sugar foods, increases inflammatory markers in the body, which further promotes visceral fat accumulation. Visceral fat is metabolically active and produces its own inflammatory compounds, which interact with insulin signaling and worsen insulin resistance. By reducing snacks, you lower the frequency of inflammatory triggers, allowing insulin sensitivity to improve and fat-burning pathways to activate. This creates a more favorable environment for losing deep abdominal fat rather than simply managing superficial weight. Over time, the combination of lower insulin, reduced inflammation, and improved metabolic flexibility makes the process of losing visceral fat more predictable and sustainable. Reducing snacking also encourages a more mindful approach to eating. When you remove constant grazing from your routine, you become more aware of true hunger cues, portion sizes, and the nutritional quality of meals. Each meal becomes a deliberate event designed to satisfy energy needs without overstimulating insulin. This practice reinforces hormonal balance, improves digestion, and creates periods during the day when the body can focus on repair and fat mobilization rather than continual nutrient processing. It also reduces the psychological stress of managing constant cravings, giving you more mental energy to focus on other strategies that support metabolic health, such as sleep, stress management, and physical activity. Even small adjustments like skipping mid-morning or late afternoon snacks can create meaningful changes over time. These periods of fasting between meals allow insulin to drop more fully, help stabilize appetite hormones, and give the body uninterrupted time to access stored energy, particularly visceral fat. People often underestimate the cumulative effect of these small windows because the impact isn't always immediate or dramatic, but consistent practice compounds, creating an internal environment that favors fat burning. As insulin stabilizes, cravings diminish, energy becomes more consistent, and the body becomes more responsive to fat-burning signals that have been blocked by habitual snacking for years. This simple yet powerful habit becomes a cornerstone for unlocking visceral fat naturally and sustainably. Healthy fats support hormonal balance and sustained energy because they provide a stable source of fuel that does not provoke the rapid insulin spikes caused by refined carbohydrates or sugary foods. When you include healthy fats in your diet, such as olive oil, avocados, nuts, seeds, and fatty fish, your body benefits in multiple ways that directly impact visceral fat reduction. Fats are slower to digest, which means they release energy gradually and help stabilize blood sugar levels. This gradual energy release prevents the roller coaster effect of rapid glucose spikes followed by crashes, which is often what triggers cravings and overeating. When insulin levels remain stable, the body is better able to access stored fat for energy, particularly the visceral fat surrounding organs that is the most hormonally sensitive and most likely to accumulate in response to stress or poor dietary choices. Healthy fats also play a critical role in supporting production and regulation of hormones that influence metabolism, hunger, and fat storage. Many hormones, including testosterone, estrogen, and cortisol, are synthesized from cholesterol and fat-derived precursors. When dietary fat intake is too low or heavily replaced by refined carbohydrates, the body struggles to maintain optimal hormonal balance, which can lead to insulin resistance, increased fat storage, and difficulty losing visceral fat. Including sufficient healthy fats helps maintain a favorable hormonal environment, allowing the body to respond effectively to fat-burning signals. People who adopt diets rich in these fats often notice improved energy levels, better mental clarity, and reduced cravings, all of which contribute to a more sustainable fat loss process. Another important function of healthy fats is their anti-inflammatory properties. Visceral fat is metabolically active and releases inflammatory molecules that can disrupt insulin signaling and slow metabolism. Consuming fats with anti-inflammatory characteristics, such as omega-3 fatty acids found in fish or monounsaturated fats found in olive oil, helps reduce this internal inflammation. Lower inflammation improves insulin sensitivity and supports the body's ability to release stored fat efficiently. When inflammation is reduced, the metabolic environment shifts from a state of storage to a state of mobilization, allowing visceral fat to be used as an energy source rather than simply accumulating around the organs. This creates a cascading effect where reduced inflammation supports hormonal balance, which further facilitates fat-burning pathways. Healthy fats also contribute to satiety, helping people naturally reduce overall caloric intake without conscious restriction. Because fats slow digestion and signal fullness hormones effectively, meals that include them tend to be more satisfying and keep people from reaching for frequent snacks or high-carbohydrate comfort foods. This reduction in snacking and refined carb intake further stabilizes insulin, creating longer periods during the day when the body can access stored visceral fat. Satiety from healthy fats allows people to adopt time-restricted eating or spaced-out meals more easily, supporting the same hormonal mechanisms that drive fat loss without creating feelings of deprivation over time. This helps break the cycle of repeated insulin spikes that prevent fat mobilization and contributes to consistent reductions in abdominal fat. In addition to their metabolic and hormonal benefits, healthy fats support brain function, which indirectly influences fat loss behavior. The brain relies on fats for cell membrane integrity, hormone production, and neurotransmitter signaling. Stable brain function improves decision-making, impulse control, and the ability to resist cravings. When the brain receives adequate healthy fats, it becomes easier to maintain consistent habits, such as choosing whole foods, adhering to meal timing strategies, and avoiding the processed foods that trigger rapid insulin spikes. This mental support reinforces the physiological mechanisms already in place to promote visceral fat loss. Healthy fats also influence energy metabolism at the cellular level. Fatty acids serve as a dense source of fuel for mitochondria, the energy-producing structures within cells, by providing efficient, stable energy. Healthy fats reduce the reliance on constant carbohydrate intake and prevent energy crashes that often lead to overeating or snacking. This steady energy supply allows the body to operate in a state of metabolic balance, where insulin remains low enough for fat-burning processes to dominate over time. This contributes not only to visceral fat loss, but also to improved overall metabolic health, including better glucose regulation, reduced inflammation, and enhanced energy efficiency. Another key aspect is that healthy fats improve nutrient absorption. Fat-soluble vitamins such as A, D, E, and K require dietary fats for proper absorption. These vitamins play crucial roles in metabolism, hormone regulation, and cellular repair. When fats are included in meals, nutrient absorption improves, supporting overall physiological function and enhancing the body's ability to maintain a healthy metabolism. This effect compounds over time, creating an internal environment that is more conducive to sustained fat burning and overall vitality. By incorporating healthy fats consistently, the body develops a hormonal and metabolic environment that naturally favors fat mobilization rather than storage. Meals become more satisfying, energy becomes more stable, inflammation decreases, insulin sensitivity improves, and neurotransmitter function is supported. These combined effects allow visceral fat to be accessed and burned efficiently, creating a foundation for sustainable fat loss and long-term metabolic health. Hydration plays a critical role in visceral fat reduction because water is essential for nearly every metabolic process in the body, including the mobilization and burning of stored fat. When cells are well hydrated, they function more efficiently, enzymes work optimally, and the body can process nutrients and energy with greater precision. Dehydration, even mild, can slow metabolism, impair digestion, and make it more difficult for the body to access stored energy. Many people overlook hydration as a fat loss strategy, focusing instead on diet and exercise, yet failing to maintain proper fluid balance can undermine all other efforts. Water helps transport nutrients, remove waste products, and maintain cellular integrity, all of which are essential for the hormonal signaling that triggers fat burning. Without adequate hydration, insulin regulation can be impaired. Digestion slows, and the body remains in a state where fat storage is favored over fat mobilization. Drinking water also helps regulate appetite, which is closely linked to visceral fat accumulation. Thirst is often mistaken for hunger, causing people to eat unnecessarily when their bodies actually need fluids. This leads to additional insulin spikes, calorie intake, and fat storage, particularly in the abdominal region. By staying properly hydrated, hunger signals become more accurate, allowing you to eat only when the body truly requires fuel. This reduces snacking and overeating, which otherwise keep insulin elevated, and make it more difficult for the body to access visceral fat for energy. Hydration also enhances satiety during meals, particularly when water is consumed before or with food, because it helps stretch the stomach and signals fullness to the brain, supporting more mindful eating patterns and preventing unnecessary caloric surplus. Water is also crucial for the metabolic reactions that break down fat. Lipolysis, the process by which fat cells release stored triglycerides to be used for energy, requires adequate cellular hydration to proceed efficiently. When the body lacks water, these reactions slow down, making it more difficult to access stored visceral fat. In addition, hydration supports kidney and liver function, which are responsible for filtering waste and metabolizing fat-derived byproducts. Optimal kidney and liver function ensures that the byproducts of fat metabolism do not accumulate and interfere with overall metabolic efficiency. This means that simply drinking enough water allows the body to process stored fat more effectively and reduces the burden on organs that support fat loss. Proper hydration also improves energy levels, which indirectly supports visceral fat reduction by making physical activity easier and more effective. When cells and tissues are hydrated, muscles perform better, endurance improves, and recovery is faster. Physical activity in combination with adequate hydration enhances fat-burning pathways by increasing the body's need for energy, which in turn encourages the mobilization of stored visceral fat. Even small deficits in hydration can lead to fatigue, poor exercise performance, and reduced motivation, creating a situation where the body is less able to burn fat efficiently. Staying hydrated ensures that energy production at the cellular level operates at peak capacity, allowing exercise and movement to maximize fat burning potential. Hydration also interacts with the body's thermogenic processes. Drinking cold water, for instance, can increase energy expenditure slightly because the body uses energy to warm the water to body temperature. This process, while modest, contributes over time to increased calorie expenditure and supports metabolic function. Beyond this, water helps maintain optimal blood volume, circulation, and nutrient transport, which ensures that fat-derived energy can reach tissues efficiently when needed. Without sufficient hydration, circulation may be compromised, nutrient delivery is slowed, and fat mobilization becomes less effective. This illustrates that hydration is not just a passive requirement. It actively influences how the body regulates and burns visceral fat. In addition to supporting metabolism and fat mobilization, water helps reduce cortisol levels and stress. When the body is dehydrated, stress responses are heightened, increasing the release of cortisol, which encourages visceral fat storage. Proper hydration sends a signal to the nervous system that conditions are stable and safe, helping to lower stress hormones and reduce the body's tendency to store fat as a protective measure. This hormonal effect complements other strategies, such as meal timing, sleep optimization, and healthy fat consumption, reinforcing the internal environment needed for visceral fat reduction. Hydration also supports digestive health, which is critical for visceral fat management. Adequate water intake ensures smooth bowel movements, prevents constipation, and helps maintain a healthy gut microbiome. The gut microbiome plays a significant role in regulating metabolism, inflammation, and fat storage, including visceral fat. When hydration is insufficient, digestive efficiency declines, inflammation rises, and the body may retain more fat around the abdomen. By supporting gut health, hydration indirectly enhances insulin sensitivity and fat burning capacity, creating a more favorable environment for sustained fat loss. By consistently maintaining proper hydration, the body optimizes metabolic processes, hormone regulation, digestion, and fat mobilization. Water supports enzyme function, nutrient transport, lipolysis, thermogenesis, energy production, and stress reduction, all of which contribute directly to the release and burning of visceral fat. Hydration becomes not just a supportive habit, but a foundational pillar of effective fat loss, ensuring that the body's internal systems function at peak capacity and create the hormonal and metabolic conditions necessary for deep, stubborn fat to be accessed naturally. Consistency in lifestyle habits is one of the most powerful yet overlooked strategies for burning visceral fat because the body responds to repeated signals over time rather than occasional efforts. Many people approach fat loss with bursts of intense activity, strict dieting, or short-term challenges. But without ongoing consistency, the body cannot adjust its hormonal environment to support lasting change. The visceral fat is particularly responsive to the cumulative effects of daily habits because it is highly sensitive to insulin, cortisol, and other metabolic hormones. When lifestyle patterns are irregular, such as fluctuating sleep schedules, sporadic exercise, or inconsistent meal timing, these hormones remain unpredictable, keeping the body in a state where fat storage is prioritized over fat mobilization. True change occurs not through occasional extremes, but through the steady repetition of behaviors that align with the body's natural metabolic rhythms. Consistency impacts insulin sensitivity directly because regular habits create predictable patterns for glucose management. When meals, activity, and sleep occur consistently, insulin levels rise and fall in a rhythm that allows the body to store energy efficiently when needed and release it when appropriate. Sporadic behaviors disrupt this rhythm, causing insulin resistance, energy crashes, and cravings that lead to additional fat accumulation, particularly in the abdominal region. Over time, repeated inconsistency reinforces the body's tendency to store visceral fat as a protective measure, while steady habits signal to the body that energy is available but does not need to be hoarded. This creates a more favorable hormonal environment for accessing deep fat reserves, allowing metabolic processes to work more efficiently with less effort. Sleep consistency is a critical component of maintaining hormonal balance and supporting visceral fat loss. Irregular sleep schedules, such as varying bedtimes and wake times, confuse the body's circadian rhythm, which regulates metabolism, appetite, and energy use. When the circadian rhythm is stable, the body becomes more efficient at producing growth hormone during deep sleep, regulating cortisol, and maintaining insulin sensitivity. Inconsistent sleep, even if total hours are adequate on average, disrupts these processes and keeps the body in a more stress-prone state that encourages fat storage. By establishing consistent sleep routines, you reinforce the body's natural cycles, reduce stress hormone levels, and create conditions where visceral fat can be released systematically rather than intermittently. Consistent physical activity also plays a major role because the body adapts to repeated demands. Short-term bursts of exercise without routine often lead to temporary energy expenditure but minimal hormonal adaptation. Regular movement, including cardiovascular activity, strength training, and functional exercise, gradually improves insulin sensitivity, supports muscle mass, and enhances fat burning capacity. Muscle is metabolically active, and maintaining it consistently increases baseline calorie expenditure, which complements hormonal regulation and visceral fat reduction. Consistency in exercise also helps regulate cortisol levels. Sporadic intense exercise can spike cortisol, whereas regular moderate activity trains the body to handle physical stress efficiently without triggering fat storage mechanisms. Meal timing and dietary consistency are equally important. Regular meals spaced throughout the day support stable insulin and ghrelin levels, preventing erratic spikes that drive cravings and overeating. When the body can predict nutrient intake, it becomes more efficient at processing glucose and mobilizing fat during periods between meals. Inconsistent eating patterns, such as skipping meals one day and overeating the next, disrupt these rhythms and can exacerbate visceral fat accumulation. Balance. Consistent meals that include protein, fiber, and healthy fats further stabilize blood sugar, improve satiety, and allow the body to spend longer periods in a fat-burning state. Over time, repeated adherence to consistent eating patterns trains the metabolism to favor fat mobilization instead of storage. Consistency also reduces stress on the nervous system. When daily routines are irregular, the body perceives unpredictability as a threat, triggering elevated cortisol levels and reinforcing visceral fat storage. Predictable routines for eating, sleeping, activity, and relaxation communicate to the brain that conditions are safe, lowering chronic stress responses. This hormonal stability is a prerequisite for the body to efficiently access stored fat and maintain metabolic flexibility. Small, repeated behaviors compound over weeks and months, producing cumulative effects that are far more impactful than occasional extreme interventions, making steady, reliable patterns a cornerstone of sustainable fat loss. Another key aspect of consistency is psychological reinforcement. When habits are repeated daily, they become automatic, reducing the mental energy required to make decisions about food, movement, or rest. This consistency reduces decision fatigue, prevents emotional eating triggered by stress, and strengthens self-regulation. Over time, habitual routines create a positive feedback loop in which the body and mind operate in alignment with fat-burning goals. Metabolic efficiency improves, cravings diminish, and the internal environment becomes one in which visceral fat can be released naturally. This cumulative effect demonstrates why persistence and repetition, rather than intensity or perfection, determine long-term success in reducing stubborn abdominal fat.